Hello, this is Dr. Carola Fortner, and I am your instructor for week 3 of your research methods class. So let's take a look at the overview. This week is all about psychological measurement and experimental research. Now, science in psychology wouldn't be very much without being able to measure things. Otherwise, it'd be all good guesses, right? And experiments are essential because the only way to assign causation is through experiments themselves. So we've talked about other ways of researching with surveys and correlations, etc. This chapter is about measuring and conducting experiments. And so as we are looking at this, we are starting with our discussion this week, after you've done your knowledge pass, etc., and you went into this. So in the discussion, you actually have to pick out one of these studies. Okay, so we have one about interventions that work with high school students who are truant. We've got successful reading strategies for English as a second language students in elementary school. Another topic is effectiveness of time management strategies for online students. Healthy habits of women in their 30s that improve their health and fitness is one of the topics. Bullying interventions in middle school. You can also design a short experiment for the effects of room colors and employees' moods, the influence of music on customer shopping behavior, the sway of breakfast foods on test performance, and the preventative effects of meditation versus exercise on infections with a common cold. All right, you can also make up your own. So you pick a topic, and in the second step, you design a simple experiment. So first of all, you need to identify what is the issue that you are studying, right? So you want to expand that problem a little bit using your imagination, and what you want to do is state a research question. So this is not the hypothesis yet, but a question that you want to explore. Like, for example, how do room colors affect the employees' moods in a bank or something like that, all right? And so then you need to define the concepts involved operationally. That means you have to just define them in a way where they're observable. So for example, if you are talking about time management strategies, if you were to pick that study number C, letter C, then you would say, what I mean by time management, okay? And you would have to say, what are online students? Okay, or if you were looking at reading strategies, you would say, what reading strategies? Okay, and how are, how do you measure, what kind of measurements would be involved in, looking at reading, and how do you measure reading level? What does that mean? Okay, so you need to determine the concepts operationally. So then you have to look at the independent variable. Okay, so what is the independent variable, which actually is what you are manipulating? And what is the dependent variable, what you are measuring? So for example, if you are looking at the preventative effect of meditation versus exercise on infections, so what you're varying is the type of preventative intervention, like meditation versus exercise. Okay, so the intervention is the independent variable. Okay, and then the dependent variable is what you're measuring. So in that case, in example I, the infection rate would be what you're measuring. Or in example F, what you're measuring is the customer shopping behavior. So maybe how big are their bills, the receipts. So those are the independent and the dependent variable. So now we have to develop a hypothesis that predicts how the variables are related. So you would say the effectiveness of time management strategies is positive related for online students. Okay, so implying that if you have more effective strategies, that you might maybe have better grades. So you would measure it that way. So that's your hypothesis. The hypothesis is always about how the variables relate to each other. And now, who are your subjects? How many of them would there be? Like the shoppers would be your subjects, or the employees, or the people having breakfast, right? And how many do you have, and where do you recruit them? You're going to go to a restaurant and look at them. Where do you find your shoppers? Where are your middle schoolers, the ESL readers, right? So you have to figure out how many would you need and how do you recruit them? So you want to describe a simple experiment that would shed some light on the variables, and you want to choose either a between subject design or within subject design. And what that means, you learned a knowledge path, right? If you're not sure, Google it. There's more information to be had. And then what role will random assignment play in your experiment? For example, if you're dealing with shoppers, do you take every shopper? Or do you take every fifth shopper in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening? That kind of thing. So you don't know, I don't know how you're going to do that, but you have to determine how do you assign your participants, okay? And this is kind of what you're talking about in your discussion. So your initial discussion demonstrates the knowledge of what we have learned this week. And then you are supposed to make responses that are meaningful to 4 or more students. And that's that. Then the next test for you of your, this is the same thing. I wanted to point out to you that if you kind of sort of forgot about experimental design, there is actually a video that you can watch that's mentioned in your overview, and so that should be helpful as well. Okay, so now one of the tasks that you have this week as well, besides the discussion, is a quick APA format comparison. So but here we want just sort of like a paragraph, a substantial paragraph that describes what, if any, changes you made to your literature review from week 2, hopefully looking at A, my feedback, and B, looking at the APA paper, sample paper by Purdue College Online Writing. Okay, and there is right here a link to that paper. Compare what you did and then kind of write about what you learned from that and how you will or would change it. There's also a sample APA paper that you can take a look at. So that's your first little assignment here. And the next bigger assignment this week is then to take your literature review that you've developed in last week. Hopefully you looked at my feedback and integrated that feedback. If you submitted on time, you had a chance to review that feedback and resubmit for full points, right? So at this point, you go back to your feedback that you received from me, and maybe also at your APA comparison. Now you take that literature review the way it is, or maybe with some tweaks, and add to it. So the paper you're going to submit is going to be adding to what you have there. And what you want to add is a research statement. So we just practiced that in the discussion section, right? When you made your little experiment. So now you make a research statement that describes the purpose of your research proposal and how it relates to the literature that you reviewed. So hopefully you kind of led towards that with your literature review, saying like, here's some gaps, or this is what should follow in terms of research. So did you discover these gaps? Are your findings you want to strengthen, or maybe repeat or expand upon? And so then, just like in that little experiment, you describe your variables that you're interested in studying and define them operationally so that they're measurable. Then you state your hypothesis. How will these variables relate to each other? What's your expectation in terms of what your findings are? So that's different than your research question, right? So now you're putting a hypothesis, and you go into some detail describing your target population, which is the group of people from which you draw a conclusion once the research is finished, right? And what's the sample? So the population is the group of people, maybe patients with depression, right? And the sample that you would study would maybe be 500 people that have responded to a survey in a certain way, or that you recruit a certain place, that maybe they're all female, adolescents, or whatever your subpopulation is. How do you decide which individuals you're going to include and not include? Okay, then you have to look at the characteristics that these people need to have to become a participant in your study. Where do you find them? How will you recruit them, and how many will you need? Will you do any kind of randomization? If not, you should probably explain why. And then how do you think this is going to affect the generalizability of your study? So if you, for example, are interested in veterans and you only look at female veterans who are recent and they're currently 25 years old, it's going to be hard to conclude from your study onto like veterans who are over 60 and they're male, right? So you have to kind of, which is okay if you select your study that way, but then your generalizability of your study is determined by the type of sample that you select, okay? So your submission for the week is your edited literature review with the additional methods section above, all right? And here is a little bit of information. Here's a video, a 9-minute video that talks about how to write a method section. And so the whole thing now, including the literature review from before, should be about 5-6 pages. If you don't count the cover page and the reference page, just the text. Make sure you use APA's formatting and follow it that way. Okay, so those are the assignments for this week. I am available for any questions that you have, and I have also provided you feedback on your previous work. Okay, have a good week.